Hello, friends. Lacey Camp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Dr. Curt Thompson. Curt and I have gotten to be friends over the years. He's been on No Small Endeavor a couple of times. This is, I guess, the second full interview we've done with Curt. And as well, some years ago, he was on one of our live shows at the Ryman Auditorium that night, which was a lovely night. There, downtown Nashville. Curt's a great guy. He's a psychiatrist. And as a psychiatrist and a clinical practitioner, he is working at the intersection of spiritual formation and interpersonal neurobiology. What I understand of interpersonal neurobiology is basically, I think I would sum it up from what I understand, is we get shaped in all sorts of ways. Our brain structures themselves get shaped by relationships, by the people around us, by the exchanges we have with people around us, the stories we tell and the stories other people tell us, our environment, and that we are not just these lone monistic things wandering around in the universe all by our lonesome, but that even the very structures within us are formed by the people around us. It's a fascinating claim and lots of interesting research being done on all of that. And so I always find these conversations with Curt especially interesting. Hope you enjoy it and hope you find it helpful. Peace to you. Hey, friend, if you didn't know, I started a newsletter a while back that comes out every 2 weeks. I've been delighted to hear from so many of you about positive response to the newsletter. We call it the No Small Endeavor Notebook, where I riff on themes and topics related to our podcast, giving you additional material for thinking and doing in your own quest to make sense of what it might mean to live a good life. Join us by going now to nosmallendeavor.com and sign up there. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com to sign up now for our free No Small Endeavor Notebook newsletter. Dr. Curt Thompson, welcome back.
Lee Camp, my man. Oh, my gracious.
It's good to have you back with us.
Thank you. It's a delight. It's an honor. It's always been very humbling to be invited and really glad to be talking with you today.
Yeah, me too. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah.
So grateful to get to be with you. So we thought, since we're releasing this episode around Valentine's Day, in which people are thinking about love and relationships and a desire to be connected to other folks, that this, of course, fits very beautifully with all of your work, I would say. But let's first start talking about desire, and especially from some theological perspectives, desire is often depicted as something to be frightened of, I think. But you're insisting, that desire and the celebration of desire is at the heart of what it means to be human. So begin to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I think two things. I think you look around and the notion of desire is undeniable. Now, some would say that what we first see with newborns and infants and toddlers, their longing for things, their appetites for things at first, one might just code that as like that's just intuitive to what it means to be kind of an animal, right? There's a sense in which, well, so do horses want to be fed, and so do cattle want to be, all those things that they need in the way that we are also hungry and tired and so forth. But one of the things that we see with children that lands in this area of attachment is this idea that we long to be seen. And as our brains grow, as we mature, we have a growing awareness that I long to be seen. I don't just have, we watch newborns, and you will watch newborns and infants, and you find their gaze, and you find them wanting to see your gaze. And desire for that is plain. I want to be seen. And the thing is that doesn't stop with being a newborn. How many of us walk into a room and we when we see someone who sees us and recognize this longing to be seen is unquenchable. So we long to be seen. We long to then be soothed. How many of us walk around with these griefs that we carry? We say that we are people of great longing. We are people of great grief. Human beings are. I long for my grief to be soothed. And This is also something that we see in newborns and toddlers, of course, but this also doesn't change. I will go to my grave wanting to be soothed of all kinds of things, not just soothed of, my fractured hip that's going to happen when I fall over when I'm, 82, but also my emotional states. I long to be soothed, but I also, then there's this word, I want to be safe, which means I long to be comfortable and confident. And, it's important for us, I think, to qualify that word safe. Safe has become a word that has been, in some respects, we can misuse this word. In some places, I say I'm not safe is a translation of I don't really want to do what you want me to do, and I don't feel safe doing that, so it's a way for me to not have to be responsible. But what we're really saying is, of course, with children, we want to protect them. We want to keep them safe from things that are harmful, that are outside their skin. But here's the other thing that we often don't recognize is that I also need to be protected from myself. I have to be made safe from my own impulses. My impulses to do all kinds of things that will not be good for me and not be good for other people. And so parents, their job is to both protect me in order for me to become comfortable and confident, not just because the world is safe for me, but because I am safe for the world. And that takes a lot of work, in which I have to also learn how to demonstrate restraint. All this has to do with longing, has to do with desire. It has to do with our desire becoming more mature. Because here's the other thing that we then see with children. You don't have to train kids to do this, but eventually at some point where kids get old enough, they start to bring you things that they have made. And we might not recognize these things. It's something that they've colored. It's something that they've formed, and they think it's great, and they want you to think it's great. They want you to put it on your refrigerator and invite the neighbors and charge money to see it because it's that great, because there is this impulse within us to make things. And this longing for beauty, this longing to create and for our creative endeavors to be enjoyed by other people. And so there is this sense of innate human longing. Now this is creativity. This is a longing that goes way beyond just the instincts of animals. As much as we'd like to believe that animals have the capacity cognitively to be aware that they're aware in the way that humans are, there's just no evidence of that. And we become aware that we long to create things. And so I want other people to come and enjoy that. But even that thing that I make, that object of beauty that I see, that I long to be in the presence of, a sunset, some great piece of art, I also long to enjoy that with someone else.
Yeah.
So I create this, and the thing that I create also then creates the opportunity for greater connection with community. Mm-hmm. One last thing, though, I think is important to say, and this comes from, I'm sure, our listeners may be familiar with the work of French philosopher and literary critic René Girard, who talks an awful lot about desire. And I think Girard rightly points out, and this is from an anthropology standpoint, that I don't just long for things. My desire is not just innate. It's true that it is a thing, like many things, that emerges from within me, but that needs to be trained. And the way that it's trained is that I don't just desire a particular car or a particular person. I desire that car or that person because someone else desires it. Meaning desire is something that I experience, but it is also simultaneously something that is mediated for me.
Which I think he uses the phrase mimetic desire, that imitative
right, because,
desire. Yeah.
Right, this and as we like to say, and this comes from other research independent of his, having to do with mirror neurons and so forth and so on. This notion that all intentional human behavior is ultimately mimicked behavior. I do that behavior because I watch someone else do it, or it has been done to me. I've observed it being done to me. Empathy, for example, is an intentionally acted human behavior. It is not, as some people say, it's not just so natural like breathing is. I have to watch it be done to someone else, or I have to have that experience be done to me, and then I mimic it. All intentional human behavior is mimicked, and such is the notion of desire. So the question is then not just what do I desire, but who are my models? Who are the people that I watch that show me what is desirable? And this is important then when it comes to paying attention to the multiple layers of desire, especially as we approach Valentine's Day. We know that love is in the air, and we can talk about desire in those terms, but we also know that very quickly that love can turn any number of different directions. And we wonder, this year, where is the love that I felt last year? It seems to be missing. I'm now directing that love towards someone else or something else. And how does all that happen? And that has a lot to do with the models that we choose who help us know how we channel and direct our desire.
So this is implicit in what you just shared there, but how do you think then about disordered desire? Or you're suggesting we need to be quite careful about the exemplars that teach us what is desirable. But if we're pressed to give some sort of abstract definition of disordered desire, what would that mean to you?
Well, some of our listeners may be aware that I'm a follower of Jesus, and so one of the questions, of course, that the Christian and Hebrew scriptures raise is the differentiation between the question, what do I want and how do I get it? In other words, what am I getting in life? Which is really the conundrum of Genesis chapter 3, right? This is what we're going to take from the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, take from that fruit, versus the question of who am I becoming? Who am I becoming? And I think this is a question that is important when we consider desire, because I want my desires to be able to helpfully help me answer the question, who am I becoming in light of my desires? If I am going to act on desires that turn me into a person who is utterly self-centered, we have other language in our field of interpersonal neurobiology for that. When we are people of integration, when we are people who are well differentiated and those differentiated parts are linked together, the Bible would call this, we are people of wholeness, even as our Father in heaven is also whole. If we are whole, we are people who demonstrate love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. I mean, who would argue with that? Hence, against such there is no law. Who's going to argue and say, "Oh, I want to be a person who's less peaceful. I want to be a person who's less kind. I want to be more mean by the end of the day." We don't know a lot of people who are trying to become disintegrated or emotionally dysregulated. And so we always are being curious about, what does wisdom tell us that desire is helping us in terms of who is the person that desire is helping me to become? It's not just what is my desire and what do I get to have. It is in the pursuit of what I say that I want, who am I becoming? What kind of a person am I becoming? And, that's been a question that has really been so much more pronounced for me, I think, even in the last 2 or 3 years. I've been wrestling with that much more plainly and seeing that, gosh, it's easy for me not to pay attention to that. Mm-hmm. I can get everything I want and turn into a real scoundrel. And not really even be aware that that's the case. And so disordered desires, we would say, are my pursuing things and pursuing things in a particular way. It's not just the object itself. It's the way I pursue it. And typically there is going to be some model that is involved that is modeling not just the thing that I want, but modeling how I pursue it. And all of that is then going to reflect on the question of who am I becoming? And so if you were to say, okay, I want you to think of 3 people you could ask this question to, and this isn't an easy question if we think about it. If you were to ask your friends, what is it like for you to live with me?
Mm.
Who do you see me becoming, and what is it like for you to live with that person who I'm becoming?
Mm.
And if they were going to answer that honestly, with kindness, but with honesty, I think those are the kinds of questions that shed light on what it means for us to have desires of order or desires that are disordered.
Mm.
I hope that makes sense.
It makes loads of sense, and that's a very powerful question, and extremely helpful insight, I think, to turn the question around about asking about who I'm becoming, and the question of the kind of character I'm becoming, and the kind of human being I'm becoming.
Yeah.
You said there at the top of the conversation that one of our deep desires is to be seen. What do you think are some of the particular ways in contemporary life that often leave people feeling unknown or unseen, even though we're supposedly quite connected?
Yeah. Well, I think in the work that I do lead, we live in a world in which, in some respects, with social media and so forth, we do everything we can to promote and expose certain elements of who we are, such that we are seen in innumerable ways. But again, like unto the question of desire, it's not just what do I desire, but in what way am I attempting to acquire what I desire? So it's not just, what part of me is being seen, but behind the scenes, no pun intended, behind the curtain, what is it that I am trying to accomplish by being seen? Am I trying to cope with the other parts of me that are not seen? Do I paint a picture that is so impenetrable, the picture that can be seen, such that the parts of me that are tender, the parts of me that feel wounded, the parts of me that are unhealed, I'm protecting to make sure they are not ever seen? I think what we're really talking about in the work that we do in our practice is, at some point, my not being seen, the parts of me that are not seen, the parts of me that I hate the most, the parts of me that I'm ashamed of, the parts of me that I'm angry about, but I never really bring out into public, or sometimes the parts of me that are enraged and I do bring out into public as a way to cope with other parts of me that I can't ever imagine naming. It's those parts that are really immersed in my unrepaired ruptures. Those are the parts that we actually long to have be seen, but we don't even think that that's a possibility. We are so committed to burying that. We are so committed to keeping parts of us outside of ourselves and away from ourselves. Like we're not even aware of it. It's not a mystery that we live in a violent world. And our violence, in many respects, is a way for us to cope with the grief of the parts of us that have not actually been seen. Mm. And so we do a lot to promote and to show certain things in ways that are actually unconsciously helping us to make sure that other parts of us are actually not seen. But those parts have been hidden for such a long time, we're often not even aware that they are present, let alone that this is primarily what we're doing. Mm. We're primarily wanting to be seen. One thinks about the internet in all of its various expressions, and the number of places where things are shown to be seen with the hope that something will come of this that will be good. without recognizing that so much of what so much of what is hidden behind it are our griefs that are longing to be healed, that may never be, because we don't even know they're there to name, such that they would be seen in the first place.
Yeah. I'd also like to go back to your commentary a moment ago about beauty, and that in this desire to be seen, to be known, we have this desire to make beauty. So speak to that in maybe practical terms. That is, what might it look like to lean into that reality, and to make the pursuit of beauty something that could deepen our relationships with one another?
I'll give you a concrete example, and I write about this in The Soul of Desire. There was a story of a woman who was in one of these confessional communities that we were facilitating, and in the course of it, she had mentioned offhandedly at one point that she had, tried her hand at painting, and it was a passing comment. And it turns out that she'd had quite a gift for this, but her life had taken the kind of turn that had made it really challenging for her to even think about that. The form and depth of the trauma that she had undergone made that whole part of her life not even something she could possibly consider. And in the course of several months in this community of healing, at one point, one of the other members, and it was significant that it was a male in the room, that circled back around and brought this to her attention and said, "I want to hear more about this." And it was as if she had to think a moment about what he was talking about. It was as if it's this far removed from her because of her trauma. It was something that long ago had been decided was not going to be worthy of her pursuit. And he invites her to come to begin to talk about it again. And there was so much of this gift of hers that had actually been entangled with her trauma that the very act of talking about it evoked things within her that were not easy for her to talk about. But with the support of this community over a number of months, and them continuing to come back to this, at some point, one of the members said, "I just would love to see one of your pieces." And by hook or by crook, at some point, she brings in one of her pieces. One thing leads to another, and there is enough healing that takes place that, as we like to say, when beauty, we'll just take it in nature. Number one, it isn't a thing that has to try to be there, right? The sunset isn't like working really hard to be a beautiful sunset. It's just there, right? The Tetons are not trying to be they're just being present as who they are. And we meet them. And that same impulse, as we see in children, to make things, you don't have to train them to do. They just do this. It is our anxiety and our trauma and our shame, our unrepaired ruptures, that end up requiring so much energy from us to contain and to cope with, that the energy that we would typically be just simply using to express the creative nature of who we naturally are is siphoned off. And so I'm burning lots of energy having to manage and contain my unhealed trauma, my unrepaired ruptures, all my rage, all my sadness, all my this, all my that, and so forth. But as this is healed, this energy is once again freed up. And the end of the story is that within about 6 to 9 months, this woman had not only begun to paint again, but agreed when asked to offer her work at a gallery that led to her work now being in different places, in different galleries across the region, and in the country, all because someone in a community decided that they were going to notice something about who she was that had been said long ago in the context of her trauma, but that was released to become something more than what it was something that she was not going to imagine on her own. She had to have other people imagine it for her while her imagination was trying to catch up. I think about people like Van Gogh and, the British art critic who was the reason that his work came to be in the public consciousness. And so many different stories of how we need others to see things in us and to call this forward. I mean, this is what happens with little children. We see it and we encourage it, and it calls more of it forward. But it's not just in the explicit expression of art itself. It's in the development of new ideas. It's in starting a new business. It's in repairing a ruptured relationship. It's in all kinds of ways in which beauty can emerge as a result of the healing that takes place. And because the energy that I've previously been using to contain all that unfinished business is now available for me to create and curate beauty and goodness as I was initially created to do.
Yeah, that's lovely. Hello, friends. Lee Seacamp here. Do you ever wish you had more folks to discuss the conversations we offer on No Small Endeavor? Something like a podcast listening club where you could engage big ideas about what it means to live life well and then discuss it with friends and companions? If so, you have stumbled upon the announcement you have been waiting for. We're pleased to announce the start of Endeavor Together, our new initiative that equips and nurtures close-knit communities to talk about the things you actually want to talk about. Each small group conversation series is built upon our podcast content and provides you with super easy to use content with questions, videos, links, and guidance so that you or any good and willing soul can host small group conversations exploring what it means to live a good life. Maybe you'll meet in homes around a table, maybe in a coffee shop or local park, maybe at work during lunch hour, maybe in a church Sunday school class. What we are providing is the scaffolding for good conversation. The rest is up to you. And here's the best part. Thanks to generous support from the Lilly Endowment, it's free. The first two series have been released. The first, Let's Disagree Better, and the second, Vulnerability. Get started today. Visit nosmallendeavor.com and click on Endeavor Together. Again, go to nosmallendeavor.com and click on Endeavor Together. Enjoy. So let's turn to, you mentioned there a moment ago, shame as one of these things that inhibits imagination, but also you've written a lot about how it inhibits, prior to that, just the connection that you see as central to our human desire. Let's first ask you a very short definition of shame for you. What's your working definition of shame?
Yeah, well, my answer is the same as it always is, which is that I don't have a definition. I only have a description of what it looks like when it shows up. And we know what it looks like. We know that first of all, it's important to know that it is before it is anything, it is a neurophysiological response. It is not just an emotional response to a cognitive, like I hear somebody say something about me and then I feel bad. It's a neurophysiologic response that can emerge as early as 15 to 18 months of age in a human. Which means this is long before children understand language, long before I know why I feel what I feel. And it results, we see it in a turning away physiologically. I turn my gaze away from you. I will put my head down. I will lower and turn my shoulders inward. I will often turn my whole torso away from you. We will see this sometimes in dogs. Right? It's very primal in this sense. And so we encounter it and begin to respond to it very early in life without having any explicit cognitive sense of what's happening. It's all very automated in that sense. There's this felt sense that I'm feeling something, and my feeling of it is related to the gaze that I see with you, that the tone of voice that I've heard, something that I've heard. Something that I've encountered non-verbally even. that has me wanting to turn away from what this thing is that I'm trying to get away from me, essentially. And it leads then to other things. It leads to what we call disintegrated states, disconnection. Anyone who's listening, we know that when we sense shame, it's hard for us to feel shame and think clearly, to be creative, to be engaged with other people. My heart rate will go up, my blood pressure will go up. I will want to leave connection with other people, but I also leave connection within myself. I sense, I image, I feel, I think, and I behave with my body. All 5 of those general features of what the mind does tend to be disconnected from one another. So there is this disintegrating move, both within myself, but between me and others. There's interesting data on the differentiation between shame and guilt, and this notion that guilt is the thing that we sense when we are older, somewhere between 4 and 6 years of age, much later in developmental life, that requires the presence of a prefrontal cortex that can tell the difference between me and you. And I've done something that hurts our relationship. There's you, there's me, and the thing I've done. I have a mind at this age that is able to actually parse those things. I can separate those things. And so one major difference is that when I feel shame, I tend to turn away from you. Children, young people who feel guilt will tend to move towards someone to say, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? I want to move because there is this thing that I've done. Guilt is I've done something bad. Shame is I am bad, even though I wouldn't even use those words because I don't have them at 20 months of age.
Yeah.
And what's then most important is that it leads to this disconnection and hiding. I feel ashamed, and then I feel ashamed that I feel ashamed. And so I want to increasingly move further into the woods, further into the darkness. The things about my life for which I feel shame, I want to keep them out of the awareness of other people. And this is why, in the story of the biblical narrative, so often we see the notion of what we call sin and the notion of shame entangled with each other. They're often paired. And where we would say that in many respects, shame is the affective state of sin. It's that neuroaffective representation of sin. And this notion of why it is that we need to have somebody come find us. When I feel ashamed of something that I've said or done to you, it's not going to be easy for me to want to come and say, Lee, I feel really ashamed. The very act of saying I feel ashamed brings it right into the room, and I don't like that. Which is why we Christians would say we've needed God to come and find us, because it's so hard for us to go and find other people when shame is so thick around our waists. And I think the cognitive element of shame that we pay a lot of attention to is that of condemnation and contempt. We like to say that anyone who is condemning other people are doing so out of their largesse, of their self-contempt. It's just spilling out of and over my own riverbanks. Those people who shame people are themselves full up with shame, and I have no idea what to do with it except share it with my friends and neighbors. And so this contempt, this self-condemnation is grounded in this sense that at some level, when it gets back to this notion that as human beings, as we like to say, every baby comes into the world looking for someone, looking for him or looking for her, and that never stops. And shame creates the opposite effect, this felt sense of your departure, that you're going to see something about me that is so shameful that you're going to turn and leave, and you're going to want nothing more to do with me. And it's why the healing of shame proves to be such a powerful antidote, but it's not going to happen because I just say to you, well, Lee, you don't need to be ashamed of that. What I need to do is to come closer and say, tell me more about the shame that you feel.
Yeah,
I want you to
storytelling,
get to a point where you're, right.
Storytelling becomes central to overcoming shame.
Yeah. Yeah. And storytelling in the sense that like, I'm going to be, you're inviting me to tell you my story, which requires a lot of work on my part to be willing to reveal that in order for me to have the neurophysiologic experience of you hearing the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and not leaving the room. And for me to have the awareness of like, oh my gosh, Lee has seen the worst of me and here he remains.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so counterintuitive, I suppose, that the very thing that one most fears in the midst of shame is the only way out, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
It's so true. Yeah.
I think you've as well have discussed a lot about having some sort of community in which this kind of healing from shame can occur. And I know in my own life, I have had profound experiences with a number of groups through the years, but I've got one in particular right now that we still meet, whenever we can on Saturday mornings. And we all know the worst about one another, and we've heard one another talk about that for years now. Yep. And we don't talk about the worst all the time, right? But when it's necessary to, if we fall down into some space that's related to the worst of ourselves, you don't have to retell the whole story again. You can just get right to it, And and there's those ongoing layers of acceptance, and all of a sudden the weight of that can just be taken off of our hearts and souls.
Yeah, I was with my own group of men this morning doing the same thing. And this morning was a morning in which I was, retelling a story of which they are very familiar. It's not new information in that sense, in terms of data, but it is new in the sense that it is not last week or a month ago. It is now, and I still have this thing that I wrestle with. And this is the other. We often think that when people imagine telling their story, what they think they're doing is that there's me, and then there's my story, which is information, data that I'm going to give to you. And once I've given it to you, now you have my story, and there's nothing more for me to say. And it is in the course of remaining in community for long periods of time that we come to recognize that we are the story. The words that come out of my mouth are not separate from me. They are an extension of me. And those words that come out of my mouth this morning that express a certain anguish about something that has been anguishing for me for now several years means they are choosing to remain with me. This is not a matter of like, oh, Curt, we've already heard this. We already know this, as if this is separate from me. Because, we're all wondering, okay, how many times do I have to tell this story to Lee before Lee's going to just roll his eyes in contempt and say, like, dude, like, when are you going to get over this? Or when are you going to, whatever this, when are you going to stop being human and like somehow like become something else? And this is also, I think, what is really crucial. We live in a world, and this is what's difficult, right? We live in a world in which we are trained, first of all, as my friend Warren Kinghorn likes to remind us, we have been trained to believe that we are machines. And when we think about machines that are troubled, that means you just take the machine to the shop and they fix the machine, and the machine is good as new. And if you can't make it good as new, you just trade it in for a different machine. There's no sense in which we're thinking about, oh, this is the computer I will have for the next 30 years. I will have to learn to live with this computer, and this computer is going to have certain elements about it that I'm not going to like, and I'm not going to like it 30 years from now. In fact, I might like it even less 30 years from now because it's been 30 years that I haven't liked it. Because I'm not a machine. And it still gets back to the question of like, am I meeting with these men in order for me to find a way for me to have the life I want to have? Or am I meeting in order for me to answer the question, how can I become the man I want to become? Machines don't ask these questions. My laptop is not being curious with me about what will I be in 5 years? Who am I becoming?
Yeah. So vulnerability as an exercise, community as an exercise and a practice in dealing with the shame that alienates us from one another. What about some practices of dealing with the internal shame or the internal narratives I tell myself that I may even be unaware of that kind of alienate me from myself or that lead to my own disintegration? How do we go about learning to surface those, navigate those?
Right. Well, one thing that we like to remind people here over in the practice, when people come in, they come for a range of different reasons. The whole gamut of neuropsychiatric challenges that people experience: depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, it's addictions, marriage problems, you name it. And when they come in, they will say, if let's just take, for instance, someone who's significantly depressed, and they would say, like, I think there's something wrong with me. And it's easy for us, once again, to think of that person who's depressed or anxious, panic attacks or whatever, as they have a problem, and the problem is their depression, for example. But one of the things I tell people is, it is true that your depression is problematic, but your depression, in some respects, is not so much the problem. In fact, that you are depressed, when you think that your brain is broken because you're depressed, I want to say to you, in fact, your brain is doing exactly what it should be doing, given the life that it has been asked to live. I'm saying all that in answer to your question, because it is to say that humans, our brain-body matrices are actually quite trustworthy. They will tell us when something's not okay. They reveal us to ourselves. Now, we might not know exactly what it is that's being revealed, but when I'm depressed, when I'm having panic events, it's telling me something about the story that I have been telling myself about myself for some period of time, but am not aware that I'm even doing that. And this is what I mean when I say that it's challenging, because we can, in some respects, if we just come to see the psychiatrist who thinks that the only thing that is happening here is a depressed person, I'm going to give them medication, often which is absolutely necessary. But if that's all I have, if all I'm trying to do is to get rid of symptoms, then I'm actually minimizing who that person actually is as a human being, because they're not a machine. They're a creature, living, breathing, growing, becoming creature. And that creature is going to have all kinds of things that it will demonstrate that something's going on internally, even the things that they don't know that they don't know. But they are going to show up. So when you ask the question, well, what about the shame that is within me that I may not even know about, or the shame that I know about it's hard? We will say that, like, our life will reveal that. Our life will reveal that something's happening. And then the question becomes, who are the people in my life who will be there to ask me the questions? Tell me what you're sensing. Tell me what you're imaging. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what the sense is that you're making of all that. It's like the patient I talk about quite frequently, who he's now been my patient for about a decade and a half, almost 2 decades. When I first met this person, and I asked them, well, tell me about what it was like growing up in your home. And they said, well, I grew up in a loving Christian home. You may have heard me tell this story before. A loving Christian home. And this is, and it's a completely believable story. This is the story that he tells. And then when you ask the question, well, who is in charge of discipline? And you start to hear that, gosh, things in his house were quite violent and brutal. It's as if he's substituted himself for another person who's telling a different version of this story. Like, well, what happened to the loving Christian home? And it's not as if he was lying to me when he said, I grew up in a loving Christian home. This is the story that he tells, that he really believes, but he doesn't pay that much attention because nobody asks him the question, who is in charge of discipline in your house? I'm like, who asks that question at a cocktail party? You could try it. And I mean, like, people either want to talk to you more or less once you have, right? This notion that there are questions to be asked of me that I'm not going to easily ask myself because I won't think to do it. But when I'm in community that is asking these questions, that's what gets at, when we say practices, what are the practices? I want to be curious about, well, where is shame showing up? How can I be aware? There in the book, The Soul of Shame, there's an exercise that we invite people to do. It's called a shame inventory. Not maybe your favorite drink, to do an inventory on shame, but it is a way of people actually turning toward and looking at shame instead of running away from it, in order to identify where is this showing up, in order for me then to bring this to a community to say, this is what I'm discovering. And for them to ask me more questions about these hidden rooms in my interior house where this is all held.
Yeah. So in your latest book, I think it's your latest book, you have suggested in the book called The Deepest Place that it might be helpful that instead of yielding to this desire that we seem to have of eliminating suffering, instead to see suffering as a place that's a crucible that can allow us to become a person that we couldn't become otherwise. So begin to unpack some of that primary thesis for us.
Yeah, well, I think, again, Lee, I think it's important for us to recognize that, one of the important questions I think for each of us to be answering at any time is, in what story do I believe I'm living? Because every human being believes that they're living in some story. Now, they may not think of it in those terms every day when they leave their house in the morning. But we live as creatures who are storytellers. We can't get away from it. And we live as creatures that are telling a story about the story that we believe that we're in the middle of. And the reason it's important for us to answer that question is because if I believe that I'm in the middle of a story in which I really do believe I'm a machine, suffering isn't going to have meaning. Suffering will be completely nonsense. Suffering will only be something that I just need to rid myself of. And yet I can't. And so what am I supposed to do about that? How am I supposed to understand? Well, all that has to do with the question of, well, in what story do I believe I'm living in? How am I going to make sense of my suffering in order for me then to decide what I'm going to do about my suffering? One of the things that we recognize about the story of the Hebrew Bible and the story of the Christian scriptures is that the Christians and Hebrews believed in a God who honors suffering, who does not see suffering only as a Western, the Western metaphysic would say suffering is bad and we're going to do everything we can to cure it, to get rid of it, so forth and so on. But it also leads to the story that we tell that if I am suffering, there's something wrong with the world or wrong with me, and that I need to do everything I can to get out of that. Eastern metaphysics, again, these are overly simplified, but an Eastern metaphysic would say that suffering in some respects is just something that we are making up in our mind. And that and with the right posture of mind, we can divest ourselves of suffering. And the Christian Hebrew story tells a different story. It tells a story of we see suffering and we're going to walk right toward it. Now, this does not mean that we, to honor suffering is not to say that we glorify it. It's not to say that we enjoy it. It's not to say that we look for ways to elevate it. we do everything we can to mitigate it as we are able. We do what we can about disease. We do what we can about, all kinds of medical and psychological suffering and so forth and so on. The challenge is what happens when we encounter those things that are not going to budge. The cancer that I'm not going to escape, the chronic pain syndrome that I have, that my father took his life when I was 15. Like, I will live with that forever. What am I going to do with that? That I am married to someone who is suffering deeply from some kind of illness, and I'm going to be with them for years. There are certain and this doesn't begin to talk about Ukraine and all kinds of other social sufferings that we encounter here in the West and all over the world. This doesn't even begin, right? It is the gospel that comes and says we want to be with this. And so that story is important because one of the things that we would say, even from a neurobiological standpoint, is that I suffer as a human is different than what happens to any other creature. Horses, cats, squirrels do not suffer as humans do. Now, people might think, oh my gosh, yes, they do. We don't have any evidence of this. And by this, I don't mean to say that they don't experience pain. They certainly do. But what we mean when we talk about suffering, we're really talking about a human being's response to pain over time, which includes my capacity as a human being to tell time in the way that I do. Because for me to encounter pain is one thing. For me to encounter pain and be aware that this pain may be with me until I die in 40 years, that's a whole other kettle of fish. And that adds to what I'm experiencing even now. But that whole notion of how I tell time, the story that I tell within time, is all shaped, once again, by my community. By whom am I being seen, soothed, safe, and made to be secure in the middle of my pain? Who is willing to be with me no matter how long this lasts? Am I able to imagine that you aren't going to run out of patience when my pain seems to not run out of gas? And so forth and so on. And so I think one of the major things that we would say that suffering does is that suffering, again, is part of what there is the opportunity for it to turn me into a particular kind of person that's exploring that same question even apart from my suffering.
You're saying that the same question that you might ask about desire, namely, what kind of person am I becoming by my pursuit of this desire, to ask what kind of person am I becoming by the way in which I am seeking to navigate this suffering?
That's right. And, for some of our listeners, they may have heard of a character in the Bible called Job. And, Job was a man who thinks about suffering. And he had friends and they couldn't keep their mouths shut. They tried as hard as they could just to be present with him. They tried and tried, but at some point they just had to start to talk to Job about what it was that he did that has him in the predicament that he's in. It's very difficult for us to be with people and feel powerless to help them and not recognize that our very presence in and of itself is an antidote to suffering.
Do you have any working hypothesis on why, given that the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament both, but especially the Hebrew Bible, has so much on lament and grief and suffering, why it is that at least some would suggest that American Christianity seems to be somewhat preoccupied with a shiny plastic happiness that doesn't have a great deal of space for lament? One, do you think that stereotype is fair? And two, if so, why do you think that might be the case?
Well, I'm I could list all the ologists that I'm not an anthropologist, not a sociologist, and so forth. So I don't know. I am taken by Girard's work. I'm taken by Charles Taylor's work that invites us to consider that, we didn't just get here overnight in the West. We are in some respects, the beneficiaries. In some respects, the side effects of the Enlightenment and modernity. And there are ways in which this whole notion of us becoming, believing that we are machines, it's not a small thing. Again, that's said so crassly. It's like, well, nobody. I don't think I'm a machine, Curt. Of course not. Of course, no. Anybody who's listening to this would think that my words sound incredulous. But when you look at what happened to Detroit in the 1960s and 70s, when they went from having line workers replaced by machines to make machines, you see now in medical training, you find that we now treat patients as if they are just a series of diagnostic things, right? And we train physicians to treat patients in this way. We are being trained to become machines, to treat people as machines. And of course, this all sounds, as coming out of my mouth, of course, this sounds ridiculous. Except when you see it in real life, and anybody who's been in line to get to see the doctor would know what I mean. I say all that to say we are a people who's working really hard to put lots of shiny polish on lots of things, to do lots of things, to avoid our suffering, to not pay attention to everything we possibly can. And we have a story that we tell about it. And it's easier for us to do that when I don't have a working, substantive sense of community that I'm living with day in and day out and day in and day out. And so the sense that I see myself as an individual primarily and not see myself as part of a community primarily means that it's really difficult for me to know what to do with my suffering if I believe that I'm alone with it. Again, this is not unlike shame, that suffering, one of its primary features is not just that I have pain, but that I sense that I am alone with it. And our being alone with ourselves is something that then leads me to needing lots of different accessories to help me cope with any kind of extra pain that happens to show up in my house. And so I think for our audience, the questions are not just what do we do with suffering, but who are the people who are with us, who are willing to be with us when the pain comes that is not going to leave right away. And this is, so many Psalms of lament, I think, are written as they are because they were a people that in following the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were recognizing the world as it really is. The world will not be avoided. It will not be ignored. It is a world in which we suffer. And so the question then becomes, in those elements and places and ways in which we do, what is the sense that we are going to make out of it? But also, back to Girard's question, who are the models who are going to help me tell that story by which I will make sense of, such that my suffering becomes an opportunity for me to actually become a person of greater love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and gentleness.
What do you think about, you said a moment ago that you're not suggesting here that there's some sort of, you didn't use this word, but you're not suggesting some sort of masochistic pursuit of pain and suffering, right? There's no sort of glorification of pain or suffering in and of itself, but instead a posture that we're willing to enter into it. And I would presume there that there's another distinction to be made, and that is between suffering that somehow can lead to transformation of the self or growth, and a sort of useless suffering that one perhaps could get out of, but might require some very difficult decisions. But I don't know, how would you think about that distinction? Is that a legitimate distinction?
It is, and of course, unsurprisingly, my mind turns to developmental models for this. It's the now this will sound somewhat crass as well. It's if one can imagine that there is a 3-year-old who's not getting what they want, and they are upset about it, and they are crying about it, and they are upset in they're crying. And the mom has given them a choice. You can sit there and cry and be upset, or you can have this snack. But that's not the snack that they want. They want a different snack. And the mom holds the line with loving kindness and says, you may have this snack or none at all. And so your choice is you can suffer or you can have your snack. And they will sometimes choose to suffer. And mom will say, that's okay. I guess you're just not going to have your snack. And this is what it means for parents to train children to become more resilient. Children have to learn how to tolerate living in a world in which they do not always receive what they want, because there are other wiser people who are thinking ahead of them, for them, in that regard. That picture is not unlike what we might see in lots of different spaces, where people are not getting what they want, they are upset about it, and they would describe their distress and their pain as a certain kind of suffering that is because of choices that they are making. I have a certain kind of suffering that I'm going to endure if I am committed to my addiction. And if I don't want to suffer in that way, I'm going to have to decide if I'm going to be willing to step out of my addiction. And this is true for lots of us, where we think that suffering is really just about getting, me managing my pain, when really it also has to do with me not getting what I want, when what I actually want is not perhaps good for me. And this is tricky, because we live in a world in which we are very loath to have anybody else tell me what is good and bad for me.
So as we move toward a close, leave us maybe with a word of encouragement. What would be 2 or 3 brief takeaways if someone finds themselves resonating deeply with what you shared today? What would be some practical steps forward in the right direction?
Well, I would say, when it comes to, I tell people, the news about shame is far worse than you know, and far better than you can imagine. And I say the same thing about desire. As you mentioned at the top of our time, desire is often kind of given a bad word. We're anxious, we're worried about it, and we're worried because we haven't really allowed ourselves to really explore it in the way we're made to explore this, not in some way that I can just have whatever I want, however I want it, whenever I want it. But the opposite of that is my not asking for what I want at all is equally unhelpful. And so I think one thing that I would be curious about is, what is it, if we were to ask the question, this is a question for us to be asking, what is it that you want, and how is that related to the question of who are you becoming? Who do you want to become? Who do you want to become? And how is what I want lining up with that? Because I want to say that if you're actually paying attention to becoming a person of integrity, becoming a person of wisdom, of honor, of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and all the rest, no matter what your faith experience is, if that's the kind of person that you want to become, then there will be certain things that you will want, and I will want you to go get them. And then doing an inventory about shame. Where are you burning energy containing shame about things where there is unfinished healing business that needs to be taken care of, where there are unrepaired ruptures? And who are the people who can come to find you to help that happen? In order for you to take even more seriously those places in your life where you suffer, so that you will not suffer alone, in order for you to realize that you were made to create beauty and goodness in the world, while you become beauty and goodness in the world at the same time. That's what we were made to be.
talking to Dr. Curt Thompson. Curt, always great to be with you. Thanks so much for your time today and all the beautiful work you're doing in the world. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
This episode is brought to you by FX's Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette. Join host Evan Ross Katz on the official podcast for FX's new series, Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, and go behind the scenes with cast and special guests, featuring Sarah Pidgeon, Paul Anthony Kelly, Grace Gummer, and Naomi Watts. FX's Love Story, John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette, wherever you listen to podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Peloton. Break through the busiest time of year with the brand new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. With real-time guidance and endless ways to move, you can personalize your workouts and train with confidence, helping you reach your goals in less time. Let yourself run, lift, sculpt, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.